She wore floral dresses, kept her hair curled neatly, and greeted her neighbors with a gentle smile that made her seem like the very image of a sweet Southern grandmother. But behind that smile lurked something far darker, something no one could have imagined. In kitchens where pies cooled on windowsills and children played in the yard, Death walked quietly, spooned into meals and poured into glasses. She laughed while others wept, finding amusement in loss, comfort in destruction. This is not the story of a woman hardened by circumstance alone. It is the chilling story of Nannie Doss, the grandmother whose gentle giggle masked the trail of bodies left in her wake. How could one woman poison so many of the people closest to her, and still be trusted time and again? Before we unravel this disturbing tale, I'd like to know, where are you watching from tonight? Let us know in the comments, and if you're fascinated by true crime stories told in full depth, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you never miss the darker chapters of history we uncover here. The year was 1905 in the rural heart of Alabama, a world where life was dictated by the land and the relentless rhythm of survival. In this world of cotton fields and dirt roads, Nannie Hazel was born on November 4th, a child destined to carry the weight of both hardship and secrecy. Her family was poor, and her childhood was shaped not by laughter or gentle nurture, but by the harsh hand of her father, a man whose authority reached into every corner of their lives. From the beginning, Nannie's days were long and laborious, filled with the endless demands of farm work that left no time for the idle joys of youth. While other children might have found small pleasures in games or school lessons, Nannie and her siblings worked from sunup to sundown, their backs bent under the southern heat, their futures narrowed by poverty and strict control. The Hazel household was a place where freedom was a foreign concept, where the word of the father was law and disobedience was met with punishment. For the girls, the rules were especially suffocating. Makeup, stylish clothing, and any attempt to appear attractive were strictly forbidden. Friendships with boys were unthinkable. Their father's fear of impropriety, of a reputation stained by gossip, locked the Hazel daughters in a cage of isolation. In that cage, resentment began to grow, and for young Nannie, the longing for something more, something like the sweeping love stories she would later devour in romance magazines, took root in the quiet spaces of her imagination. At the age of 7, fate struck in a way that Nannie herself would never forget. During a train ride with her family, she struck her head against a metal bar, a blow that left her with lifelong headaches, blackouts, and periods of depression. She would later blame this injury for the darkness that clouded her life, as if the seeds of her future crimes had been planted by that single accident. But whether it was the injury, the suffocating home, or something more sinister within her nature, the young girl grew restless under the constraints of her world. The Alabama of the early 1900s was not a place that welcomed rebellion from young women. Expectations were clear. Marry young, keep house, raise children, and endure whatever burdens your husband placed upon you. Dreams were luxuries, and for women like Nannie, caught between poverty and control, the chances for escape were few. In this environment, she turned to romance magazines, their pages promising whirlwind love, devoted husbands, and lives filled with passion instead of drudgery. The glossy words became her secret sanctuary, a window into a world far removed from the reality of farm chores and her father's watchful eye. Yet the gap between fantasy and truth only widened as she grew older, and with it, a bitterness began to stir beneath her smiling exterior. By the time she reached her teenage years, Nannie was already desperate for an escape. And when she met Charlie Braggs, a man who worked at the same factory as she did, she believed she had found her way out. They had known each other only 4 months when, at 16 years old, she married him with her father's approval. For Nannie, it was the promise of freedom, a chance to step into a life of her own choosing. But in reality, what awaited her was not freedom, nor love, nor the romance she had dreamed of. Instead, it was the first step into a life shadowed by disappointment, betrayal, and eventually death. What began as the hopeful union of a young bride seeking a better life would soon unravel into tragedy, and behind closed doors, Nannie's true nature would begin to take form. At 16, Nannie Hazel became Nannie Braggs, a teenage bride stepping into a marriage that promised little of the freedom or tenderness she had imagined. Her husband, Charlie Braggs, was an only child raised under the firm grasp of a mother who never married, and who made it clear that Charlie would always belong first to her. The young couple moved into the Braggs household, and from the start Nannie's life became a battleground between herself and her mother-in-law. Every choice she made was judged, every action scrutinized, and her husband rarely defended her, torn between loyalty to his domineering mother and his new wife. Within this suffocating environment, Nannie began having children, 4 daughters born between 1923 and 1927. Though motherhood might have offered her solace, it became another layer of strain. The house was tense, filled with unspoken resentment, with Charlie often absent, seeking comfort in the arms of other women. Nannie, in turn, sought her own escape in bottles of alcohol and cigarettes, the smoke curling in the dim light of her kitchen as if to mask the bitterness taking root inside her. The breaking point came in early 1927, when 2 of Nannie's daughters died suddenly after what was said to be a case of food poisoning. The deaths struck like lightning, shocking the small community, but to those who knew the family, something felt unsettling. While Nannie showed little of the grief expected of a mother, she quickly collected a small life insurance payout, a sum that seemed to ease her mourning. Charlie, overcome with suspicion, accused her outright of poisoning their girls. Terrified and unwilling to test the truth, he fled, taking their oldest daughter with him and leaving behind the newborn baby in Nannie's care. Within a year, his own mother was dead, and with no family ties left to hold him, Charlie divorced Nannie in 1928. When asked later about his decision, Charlie admitted he was afraid of her, that he dared not eat her food when she was in a foul mood, as if even then he sensed the danger simmering behind her quiet smile. Left with 2 surviving daughters and a failed marriage, Nannie turned once more to her beloved romance magazines. Their glossy covers and flowery tales painted pictures of men who adored their wives, of passion and devotion that seemed worlds away from the cruelty of her reality. It was in these printed pages that she found her next husband, a 23-year-old man named Frank Harrelson. Through the exchange of letters, poems, and small gifts, their relationship bloomed, and in 1929 they married. Nannie must have believed she was stepping into a brighter future, but instead she found herself bound to another man who carried his own demons. Frank was a heavy drinker with a criminal past, prone to violence and short tempers. For 16 years, Nannie endured his rages, raising her daughters in a home clouded by liquor and resentment. Yet behind her smile she was changing. She had already seen how fragile life could be, how easily it could be snuffed out without consequence, and in that realization grew a dark sense of power. In 1943, her eldest daughter Melvina gave birth to a son, Robert Lee. But joy quickly turned to horror. Exhausted after a long and grueling labor, Melvina awoke to see her mother standing over the newborn, a long hatpin in her hand. The baby died within hours, doctors claiming it was due to complications, though Melvina never shook the vision of her mother's shadowed figure. Tragedy struck again in 1945 when Robert, still an infant, died in Nannie's care. This time she collected a $500 life insurance policy she had taken out on him just months earlier. That same year, after Frank returned home drunk and forced himself on Nannie in an act she would later describe as rape, her patience finally snapped. The next day she laced his liquor jar with rat poison, watching silently as his body succumbed to the slow, agonizing grip of death. To the world, Frank's end looked like the unfortunate fate of a man destroyed by his vices. But for Nannie, it was the first time she fully embraced the lethal control she had long toyed with. Far from being deterred, she felt emboldened, and with life insurance payouts padding her pockets and suspicion never landing firmly at her door, she began to view marriage not as a pursuit of love, but as a hunting ground for her next victim. In the quiet aftermath of Frank's death, Nannie once again picked up her romance magazines and Lonely Hearts columns, her pen ready, her smile practiced, and her heart fixed not on love, but on the deadly thrill of her secret game. By the early 1950s, Nannie Doss had already buried 2 husbands, 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren, each death wrapped in the veil of misfortune and explained away by illness, accident, or the frailties of human life. To neighbors and acquaintances, she remained the kindly woman who smiled too easily, laughed too often, and seemed to move on from tragedy with uncanny swiftness. But inside, her desire had shifted. Romance was no longer about finding a soulmate, but about finding her next victim. She placed ads in Lonely Hearts columns, carefully constructing letters that promised affection, loyalty, and companionship to men who were aging, vulnerable, or tired of solitude. One of those men was Arlie Lanning of Lexington, North Carolina. Their courtship was short, their marriage quicker still, and within days Nannie had moved into his home, assuming the role of a doting wife. She tended the house, attended church, and presented herself as a woman dedicated to her husband's well-being. But Arlie, like the husbands before him, was a disappointment, an alcoholic with a wandering eye, whose nights were often spent in the company of other women. For a time Nannie endured, maintaining the appearance of a faithful partner while quietly biding her time. In 1950, Arlie fell ill with flu-like symptoms, and within weeks his heart gave out. To the town it was a tragedy attributed to years of heavy drinking. To Nannie it was another successful turn of her hidden craft. After his death, the property he left behind was destined to go to his sister, but before she could claim it, the house mysteriously burned to the ground. Fire consumed the rooms where Nannie had once played the role of the perfect wife, erasing evidence and ensuring that no inheritance would fall into anyone else's hands. In the days that followed, Arlie's mother also died suddenly, a shadow of Nannie's presence lingering over yet another grave. By now her confidence was unshakable. Each death seemed to slide past suspicion. Each insurance payout or inheritance sealed her sense of control. But Nannie was not finished. Through a dating agency called the Diamond Circle Club, she found Richard Morton, her fourth husband, and once again, she stepped into marriage with a practiced charm that belied her intentions. Richard, like the men before him, soon proved unfaithful, chasing after younger women and leaving Nannie stewing in bitterness. At the same time, her elderly mother moved into their household, a new obstacle to Nannie's carefully cultivated life. The old woman's presence was inconvenient, her dependence a weight Nannie did not wish to carry. Within months, both her mother and Richard were dead. Her mother first, followed swiftly by her husband, each death explained away by natural causes. By this time, the pattern of Nannie's life had hardened into something terrifying, a cycle of marriage, disappointment, and death. Each chapter closed with a payout or the satisfaction of erasing those who had failed her. What might once have been fueled by desperation or revenge had become something darker, a ritual of control and power. She no longer sought happiness in men, but seemed instead to delight in the quiet destruction of those who trusted her most. Neighbors still saw her as cheerful, quick to laugh, and unfailingly polite. But behind the walls of her home, she was perfecting the art of the silent kill. With 4 husbands, multiple children, grandchildren, and in-laws already gone, Nannie Doss was no longer merely unlucky in love. She was a predator hiding in plain sight, and as she scanned the dating columns again, she prepared to write the final and most fateful chapter of her deadly story. By the mid-1950s, Nannie Doss had perfected her act so well that suspicion still hadn't caught up with her trail of graves. Friends, neighbors, and even doctors accepted her smiles and explanations without question. She was the ever-cheerful widow, a woman who suffered more heartbreak than most but never seemed to lose her warmth. It was this mask that allowed her to continue, but masks always crack, and Nannie's moment of reckoning came with her 5th and final husband, Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Samuel was different from the others. A strict, deeply religious man, he disapproved of romance magazines, dating clubs, and the frivolities Nannie adored. He banned her from reading true romance and true story, insisting that she devote herself to God and to a modest life. To Nannie, this was not simply dull. It was suffocating. Their marriage quickly soured, and within months Samuel grew ill. He complained of stomach pains and exhaustion, symptoms eerily similar to those that had plagued Nannie's previous husbands. Hospital tests revealed a severe digestive infection, but under medical care, Samuel improved and was released. Doctors breathed a sigh of relief, but Samuel's reprieve was short-lived. Within days of returning home, he was dead. This time, however, fate did not allow Nannie's crime to vanish without question. The doctor who had treated Samuel had grown uneasy. His sudden relapse and rapid death seemed unnatural, especially since he had been stable in the hospital. Unwilling to let it pass, the physician ordered an autopsy, a decision that would finally pull the curtain back on decades of hidden murders. The results were damning. Traces of arsenic, a poison long associated with silent killings, were found in Samuel's system. It was not a natural illness that ended his life, but deliberate, calculated poisoning. Suspicion immediately turned toward the woman who had cooked his meals, served his coffee, and been by his bedside through every symptom. When police questioned Nannie, her charm was unbroken at first. She smiled, giggled, and spoke sweetly as though she were being accused of nothing more serious than a small misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable. Samuel's body told a story that even her laughter could not erase. Under mounting pressure, investigators began to dig deeper into Nannie's past, and what they found was a graveyard of husbands, relatives, and children, all connected by a common thread. Each death had occurred under suspicious circumstances, and each had benefited Nannie in one way or another. Faced with the weight of her own history, Nannie's mask finally slipped. In a series of confessions that stunned even hardened detectives, she admitted to her long trail of murders, speaking with a disturbing mix of honesty and amusement. She laughed as she recounted the ways she laced food and drink with poison, chuckled as she described her disappointments in love, and giggled at the irony that she had become known in headlines as the Giggling Granny. For investigators, it was chilling to hear such gruesome crimes retold in such a light, almost playful tone, but for Nannie, it was simply the way she had lived, finding humor in horror, satisfaction in control, and comfort in the thought that she alone decided the fate of those closest to her. The investigation gathered pace, exhuming bodies, reviewing death certificates, and piecing together the puzzle of a life that was, in truth, a string of carefully concealed murders. Each revelation shocked the public further, for this was not a shadowy killer lurking in dark alleys, but a smiling woman who seemed incapable of cruelty. Yet here she was, openly admitting to multiple murders with laughter on her lips, sealing her reputation as one of America's most notorious female serial killers. When Nannie Doss was finally brought before the courts, the cheerful mask she had worn for decades remained firmly in place. She entered the courtroom not as a frail widow overwhelmed by grief, but as the same smiling, giggling figure who had laughed through her confessions. Reporters crowded the room, eager to capture the contrast between her grandmotherly appearance, soft face, round glasses, floral dresses, and the chilling crimes she so freely admitted. She was unlike any defendant they had ever seen. While most killers face trial with solemn silence or frantic denial, Nannie seemed amused, as if the entire spectacle were a stage play designed for her entertainment. When prosecutors described how she had poisoned her husbands, children, and relatives, she chuckled softly, sometimes shaking her head as if at a fond memory. The press seized on this unsettling behavior, branding her the Giggling Granny and the Jolly Black Widow. But beneath the headlines, the trial revealed the shocking scope of her crimes. Prosecutors presented evidence of arsenic found in Samuel Doss's body, and testimonies from doctors who had long harbored suspicions about the string of sudden deaths in her past. They painted a picture of a woman who had woven her way through life, marrying, inheriting, and killing with unnerving regularity. Each marriage was a pattern: brief happiness, disappointment, and then the inevitable poisoning that left her a widow once again. Nannie's own confessions were the most damning of all. She had admitted to killing 4 husbands: her mother, her sister, her grandson, and her mother-in-law, though investigators believed the true number might be even higher. Yet despite the gravity of these admissions, she spoke with the same light-hearted tone she had used when writing to Lonely Hearts columns, as though she were retelling love stories rather than confessing to murders. The courtroom was stunned but also horrified by how ordinary she appeared, how easily evil could wear the face of a smiling grandmother. Her defense attempted to argue insanity, pointing to her behavior and her obsession with romance magazines, suggesting she was unfit to understand the consequences of her actions. But Nannie's detailed confessions, her careful methods, and her ability to hide her crimes for decades painted a different picture. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she enjoyed the control it gave her. In the end, the jury found her guilty of murder, though prosecutors chose to focus only on the killing of Samuel Doss, knowing that conviction on this case alone would be enough to secure her fate. In May of 1955, Nannie Doss was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court did not pursue the death penalty, largely because she was a woman and, in that era, sentencing a grandmotherly figure to execution was seen as unpalatable. Still, her life sentence meant that she would never again see freedom, never again charm her way into another marriage, and never again lace a cup of coffee with arsenic. For the families of her victims, Justice had finally been served, though it could not erase the years of grief and unanswered questions. As she was led from the courtroom, reporters noted that she continued to laugh and smile, unshaken by the weight of the sentence. To the very end, she embodied the unsettling duality that had defined her life, the perfect image of a kindly grandmother hiding the soul of a serial killer. Her case became a national sensation, not just because of the murders, but because it forced the public to confront a terrifying truth: that evil does not always wear a scowl or lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it giggles, and sometimes it looks like the woman next door.